So, Audrey Borowski, thanks very much for joining me on the Hermitix podcast.
So nice to be.
We are going to be discussing your recently released book, Leibniz in His World, the making of a Savant. This is largely focusing on a 4 to 5 year Paris sojourn between 1672 and 76. I think I've got the dates right there. Within Leibniz's life. Not so much a book on his philosophy, but a book about his personality, his sort of multiple projected identities in the culture of the day, his motivations, which are all over the place. And this draws on the Republic of Letters, Leibniz's relationship to rationalism. But at the same time, the fact of 4 years condensed, like a whole book about 4 years, you realize, okay, this is a complete understatement. It's going to sound ridiculous to say it. Leibniz really was a genius and a polymath, wasn't he? And he was doing absolutely everything all at once, all the time. And it's sort of almost absurd to read just how much he was doing, and not just how much, undertakings that seem almost, I don't know, emperor-like in their grandeur, shall we say. I hope I've done your book a little bit of justice there, but before we delve in, please tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is you do, and the origins of this book.
Oh, what I do? Oh, I do many things. I'm currently a research fellow between the universities of Bonn and Cambridge. I actually work on AI these days, philosophy of AI from a slightly more conceptual point of view. And my journey in that started with Leibniz a few years ago. And when I realized that precisely because Leibniz does everything and engages in so many different things, he is a portal to many terrae incognitae for me, and a portal to many different disciplines and fields. And actually, today there is a famous French thinker of political Islam, for example, who wrote his thesis on Leibniz and China. The economist John Dewey, if I recall correctly, wrote his own thesis on Leibniz. So the moral of the story is, when you study Leibniz, he is a great friend and a great travel companion for many different disciplines and different directions. And so I like to work on different things and to work on different disciplines. I landed on Leibniz and what struck me as a very original and interdisciplinary and sophisticated kind of thinking, which kept me coming back for more. And I wrote my master's thesis about him on his paradoxical concept of continuity, if I recall correctly. And I eventually wrote my doctoral thesis on him. And I approached that perhaps slightly differently, even for me, in fact, insofar as I approached him in a more historical capacity, as someone in his younger years, exploring as a young person, trying to make a name for himself in the world, and trying to come up with various projects and various visions and various visions of reform. And I thought that since this had been slightly understudied, I thought that might be worth examining, and also being able to tell a story about it afterwards.
So this is an extension of your PhD, your doctoral thesis?
Yes. This is a transformation of my doctoral thesis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you say it was understudied, do you mean specifically the Paris sojourn or his younger years?
His younger years. I mean, there have been biographies, including the Marius and Ignatius, which are very, very good. But as with Leibniz, I think there are perhaps two biases that still prevail. Leibniz as an established figure, Leibniz as the established quote-unquote genius that has become a bit crystallized like this in history, in our historical understanding of things, and Leibniz as a philosopher or mathematician. Less so Leibniz as a diplomat, Leibniz as a troubleshooter, Leibniz as a projector, Leibniz as a jurist, and actually what he was mostly known for when he was alive, as a matter of fact, because we have this retrospective understanding of Leibniz as the author of the Monadology, new essays on the human understanding. But actually, these were posthumously published, and so Leibniz was perhaps not understood in those terms during the time when he lived.
Well, I mean, immediate segue then. What was he? What do you think he was? How was he seen? What was he understood as? And also, I guess, tangential to that, do you think it might, maybe this is a ridiculous thing to say considering his sort of solidification into the canon, but do you think it's slightly incorrect or a misdirection for us to just consider him a philosopher today in light of your research?
Well, I'm not sure it would be incorrect. I mean, he was absolutely a philosopher, but let's just say that, to use the metaphor he used, we are all bringing our little puzzles, our little pieces of the painting together. And then ideally, we have a more complete image of him. And so in my own little way, I have tried to be Leibnizian, to contribute my piece to the puzzle and make our understanding of him fuller.
Okay. So I guess to just jump back, the Paris sojourn, I mean, is it as obvious as the name sounds? This just happens to be him sojourning in Paris, or is there more? Obviously, there is more to this story.
Well, the book is actually on his Paris sojourn and when he returns to Hanover, where then he remains for 30, 40 years before being abandoned effectively by the ruling family there, who scuttle off to become kings and queens of England. But yes, it is. The book is mainly on the Paris sojourn and what that entailed, and that involved mainly going and studying Leibniz's letters, because something else, to answer your previous question, something else that is often overlooked is the amount of detail in his letters and the overemphasis, perhaps, on the philosophical, mathematical, and physical aspects contained in his letters. And for example, I have used several of so his letters are published in these Akademie-Ausgabe, these huge volumes with the letters, with the various letters he sent, and many of the letters he received. And I have seen, passages annotated of those more interesting, so-called interesting passages, which deal exclusively with Leibniz's philosophical, physical, and mathematical views, which is a great shame, because that obscures a lot of the story. In fact, a lot of Leibniz's story, and that's a terrible shame to understand how he operated, the kind of milieu he operated in, how he proceeded, how he presented himself, his various little techniques, and his various strategies, and what's really fascinating is that it gives us a wonderful perspective on how hard Leibniz, tried to establish himself as a young person, as a young guy, trying to pitch various projects, and more often than we realize, being quite gauche and awkward and clumsy in his approach, and that really contradicts the wonderful narrative we have of Leibniz as the effortless genius, whose genius was so self-evident to everyone, because actually precisely in his Paris years, that was not such a self-evidence.
How old is he at this point in time?
He's in his 20s. He was born in 46, if I recall correctly. So he's in 20s, early 30s, and yes, and he has the audacity of youth, but not necessarily the expertise or the skill or the social know-how, we shall say. And I find this quite funny, quite fascinating, and in a way quite endearing, because as I write in my book, it makes him, it's Leibniz human all too human. And we forget this side of the story. Yes.
So his motivate, like the the beginning of your book is a lot about his motivations, and he's trying to set up a lot of or found a lot of societies and communities, and there's sort of a thread of motivation, or what might be his motivations going beneath this. And you've mentioned that, the audacity of youth and this sort of boldness of trying to start grand ideas or found grand communities. Now, I mean, what do you think the truth of the matter is with regard to sort of Leibniz's motivations, and at what point they are perhaps, bona fide and genuine and may actually come to fruition, and at what point you might sort of err and say, okay, that is just a young man being a bit audacious?
I think they're both, and that's because there is a confusion, and the problem with the problem, quote unquote, what came back to quote unquote bite him in the arse sometimes is that precisely his audacity and his belief in himself coincides very strongly with his belief in his visions and his visions. But he was often very, and this audacity meant that he could be impatient with such norms, social etiquette of the time, courtly behavior, and that it could make him clumsy and look gauche and in a way insincere. But it's precisely because he was sincere that he did not have sincere and was aware of the passage of time and the necessity to act quickly, and that time was running out, that made him so forceful, and that could leave him looking a bit ambiguous. But that's precisely because he was so devoted and so sincere in his visions. He didn't have time for what he considered, a lot of nonsense in a way.
Mm-hmm. He seems, so to jump to the primary motivations, he seems to have sort of three motivations that sort of blend, which is the state, humanity, and also the church. But also you've mentioned that he's impatient and he has a problem with social norms. So to what degree is there really, I mean, is he just trying to get his own way by pandering to these sort of grand motivations, or do you think he has a sincere belief in these things?
Well, what I will say is that he is operating in a particular ecosystem where state power and science, we'll call them that, go together, and one cannot go without the other. And Leibniz knew, he was a clever operator, and he knew that in order to be able to implement his great scientific visions, his sincere visions of reform, of scientific improvement, of intellectual reunification, he had to have access to the realms of power. He had to have access to what we would call today government. But to do that, governments had their own agendas, you see. And so they only granted access to people who they thought in turn would benefit them and their agendas and their particular interests. We are after, in the wake of the 30-year war, reconstruction is necessary. Cameralism is necessary, the rise of the commercial society. And so governments, especially the court of Hanover, but especially the court of Colbert and Louis XIV, are particularly interested in those savants and scientists who are going to be able to contribute to that effort, and especially in the shape of practical applications with technical practical applications, and especially with commercial benefits. So that's the name of the game in which Leibniz is operating then. And so if he wants to implement his visions, he has to frame things first in terms that are going to appeal to the ruling class of the time, Colbert and Louis XIV, who hopefully then will enable him to gain access to such institutions as the Académie des Sciences, and then ideally, hopefully, fingers crossed, enable Leibniz to implement his vision. So this is what is required at the time. And even Leibniz, in his genius, had to, follow, go with the flow and follow the program, so to speak.
Considering his sort of genius calculating mind, is he transparent about the fact that this is a game?
Well, I'd like to nuance the genius statement, because actually, we have come to see Leibniz as a genius, and I guess, objectively, with hindsight, centuries after, it is perhaps fair to say, and he is widely recognized as a genius. But was he recognized as a genius in the Paris period? This is itself is uncertain. I mean, there are actually, Leibniz is rarely mentioned in letters. No one is going on raving about him, in particularly, aside from a few patrons here and there. So he is not actually seen as a genius, and he will come up to Colbert and to Carcavie and to several people with access to Colbert with various pitches and plans and projects. But these are generally rejected because it is considered that Leibniz has not proved himself yet, has not delivered a tangible result, as we would say in our very productivity oriented language today. So actually, he wasn't seen this way, and he was often perceived with suspicion, in fact, as a potential spy, as someone who could be used in a particular manner, a narrow, limited manner, but whose allegiances, loyalties were uncertain. This is also a way in which Leibniz's, hypermobility comes to bite him back in the arse. And you had mentioned another point, genius.
Was it all a game? Was he or was, because you mentioned that he's not too great with social norms, and there seems to be a fairly the way you've described it thus far, if I'm incorrect, it seems to be that he acknowledges, or is at least is he transparent in his letters that this is a bit of a game for him?
Well, if it is a game, it is a deadly serious game.
All games.
This could have been the subtitle to my book.
A serious game.
Human in a deadly serious game. It is a game, in the sense, to the extent that everything is a game. Everything has norms. Everything has rules, and you're within the system, outside of the system. But it is a very serious game in that there is only so much flexibility, especially in time of Leibniz. There is much fluidity in the way he can approach things, but if push comes to shove, it is a game with a very narrow and very rigid norms and rules. And Leibniz is aware of that. Or he knows it is, to a certain extent, a game, but it dawns on him gradually that within that game, even he does not control the rules or the chess pieces, that even Leibniz has to, to some extent abide by its rules, if he hopes to ingratiate himself, with the right people.
Okay, so it seems that much of the biographical and, I guess, historical structure around Leibniz then has been sort of retrospectively sewn up and made very neat and easy and quite comfortable. Because when you mentioned scientists there a bit earlier in relation to the motivations, so science of the day, you put scientist in quotation marks.
Yes.
So he's a scientist, but why are there quotation marks?
I'm using a quotation mark because the term is anachronistic, obviously. The same way that, science, biology, all of these terms and all of these disciplines which we regard as self-evident today are constructs which did not exist at the time. Back then it was natural philosophy, for example. And yes, but a lot of our understanding of Leibniz is a posteriori, retrospective reconstruction of him. And you are right to mention perhaps our need to see Leibniz in that way, to see him as this kind of untouchable, crystallized version of him, because it is my understanding that my experience, rather, with people coming up to me and expressing their dismay, their distress, their profound confusion sometimes, before Leibniz's work, which leaves me myself confused and dismayed. Leibniz has this reputation of being a very complicated philosopher, but actually, if you compare him to Spinoza or Berkeley, he is in a way a quite systematic thinker, and especially if you look at his letters, he always tried to be very pedagogical. So, and this is perhaps one of the advantages of proceeding by examining Leibniz's letters, where Leibniz, you find, often makes the particular effort of being pedagogical, when in his treatises he can be a bit abstract, a bit dry, and a bit confounding for many.
Okay, I do want to. I'm trying not to repeat what we've already mentioned, but I want to jump back to the motivations because I think it's key. So, with regard to the state, of course, we sort of have this foundation of power games and Leibniz needing to do that to enact his own ideas. But at the same time, he is attempting to enact and found many things which seem to be almost personal for him. And so, I guess to begin with regard to the state, because there is a few sort of key areas that he's motivated by. But to begin with the state, I guess we could say, what is his relationship to the state, and what is his vision for the ideal state? And at risk of making a philosophical blunder, it seemed that his vision for the ideal state was fairly close to some sort of Platonic republic.
Exactly. So happy you said that. But you're absolutely right. His understanding of the state in a more abstract term is, and here it also brings us to the kind of undercurrent of the tension between abstract and ideal, which you find always running through his work and his thought, and I think his life. I mean, when we look at Leibniz's ideal version of things, and he is quite an idealistic person, and I'm not using this in the 19th century exception, obviously. He is very much of his thought and vision and understanding of himself in the world and of the world is impulsed by strong ideals, strong visions of reform, and strong visions of reform of the state and what the state should be. And his vision of the state is very much in keeping with Plato. And I often tell people, the most boring part of Leibniz, in a way, is his political thought, which is very much, in keeping with the Platonic view of things, and perhaps with a Christian twist. He believes that the ideal ruler should behave according to the charity of the wise. And there's always this marriage of, power and will, but power and will understood, not in an arbitrary sense, but rationally, according to applied rationality and kindness, justice, fairness, charity. Now, Leibniz believes, and he declines this. He conjugates this. He gives several manifestations of this in various of his projects of ideal societies. And this is also something I wanted to shed a bit more light on in my book, his various projects, which would today be classified as philosophy and even political economy. He has various projects. He writes these, late 1660s to mid 1670s of ideal states, which are all, which tend often to be all, perfect marriage, these technocracies, these perfect political entities which vie for the improvement of science, of progress, of what we would call today technology, in keeping with Christianity, but a rationally construed Christianity, and towards the improvement of society, the improvement of mankind in general. And this is construed as the perfect, the best, perhaps, form of worship of God. And so he has, some fascinating examples of ideal societies where, one is quasi, I was rereading this in preparation for this talk. I mean, some might construe it as proto-communist, where, which believes that wealth inequality, gross wealth inequality is unacceptable, where children are raised together in educational institutions, where full employment is guaranteed, where general medical coverage is ensured. And there's a fascinating one which I quite like. I don't know why. It's called Societas Philadelphicae, in which he basically envisages that effectively scientists and technologists would gradually infiltrate civil society and gradually take power and gain access to the government, effectively ensuring a rational world government. And that's quite marvelous. And I thought it would be great fun to revisit these various little societies in this book. I don't know, maybe because, part of me aspires to be one of those rulers in one of those societies. Who knows?
This is often the case. Does his political thought, does he retain an allegiance to this audacious idealistic mode throughout his life? Does he still adhere to a belief in this Leibnizian republic till the end?
Oh, I think so. But there's always this, going back to my previous point, there's always this tension, you see, because we have our ideals, we have our beliefs, but there is also reality, and there are the intricacies and workings of actual reality, and then it's about articulating, the two together. And this sometimes succeeds, but often fails, and unfortunately, and Leibniz was a very determined individual.
Okay. So it does seem like, it seems amidst all of that, especially with this specific form of the state that is, as you said, is sort of closer to what we might consider communism today, it does seem that there is a direction. Is there an eschaton for Leibniz? Is there an end result, a purpose?
The visio beatifica, in which we would all manage, we would be so highly educated, I'm putting things simply and naturally, that we would manage to have a glimpse of the universe, and we would manage to have a glimpse of God's synoptic view on the world and his understanding of the world, and God's, not only his understanding of the world that God has, but the way God has assembled the world, the best of all possible worlds, in the most rational manner, in the simplest means, in such a manner as to actualize the maximum amount of essence.
Okay. So, an abstract statement here. So Leibniz's state then is akin to a sacred large language model, the end result of which is a divine singularity. Can we say that?
Oh, I should quote you on this.
It seems to be that, especially with the recursive acceleration of education towards a singular eventual vision. But it seems almost heretical that that's some equivalent of the Tower of Babel, no?
But yes, but let me nuance that, because Leibniz is all about multi-perspectivism, and LLMs are not. And LLMs vie for homogeneity and conformity in a way, and that's a big problem with them. Mm-hmm. So in a way, to such a and Leibniz believes in the infinite. He celebrates the infinite, and he believes in the art, what I call it the art of variation, and the fact that from one finite logical software program, if you will, you can emerge, you can conjure up an infinite number of variations, and Leibniz loves that. And actually, he thinks this is what reality and contingent reality is made up of. So, to the extent that there is a form of, collective intelligence, it is he celebrates its infinite potential and its infinite manifestations. And this brings me, more broadly to Leibniz's philosophy and the figure of the monad, which he sees as constitutive of of the reality of the world, and he doesn't see it as atoms which are completely closed off together, but as units which reflect each other. So units which reflect the infinity of which reflect all of the rest of the world, but from their particular perspective. And this, I mean, and more broadly, this is what also makes Leibniz such a cool and relevant thinker today, because he says there is an objective reality, but there are always, there is always a possibility of infinite number of variations on it. It's unity and diversity within unity and unity within diversity. And I think he uses the metaphor of the tower in the city. We have one tower in a city, and the tower can see all of the city. It's the same city, but always from a different perspective. And so in this sense, Leibniz is a wonderful advocate of, tolerance and coexistence and multi-perspectivism, and just, he was very anti-dogmatic. Sorry, I'm starting to...
So that form of spontaneity then, which needs to come in, that would alter this from being simply the LLM, which would just have this sort of basic form of intelligence, as you said, that doesn't seem to be too sympathetic with how we might stereotypically think of rationality and rationalism. So, because one of the things you do expand upon in your book is the specific form of rationality that Leibniz is working towards in this era, which of course has gone through many iterations. So there is, amidst this systematic genius, calculated genius, there is some spontaneity that doesn't quite seem to gel with the stereotypical vision of Leibniz.
But not at all. And actually, to go back to the image of the LLM, it's not Leibniz does not offer us, and contrarily to many of the thinkers of his time, Leibniz does not believe in predetermination, or he does not believe in fixed, rigid predetermination. He believes in the power of spontaneity. And in fact, his universe, and I'm not talking about the tools which he tells us we can use then to analyze the universe, his universe is a dynamic, fluid, spontaneous one. And this is something that is not so well known about him. And he doesn't believe in things that are rigid, or, in a superimposition of rigid rationality. Even the tools he has recourse to, infinitesimals, he knows these are fictions, and that these are loose fictions, which we use with some degree of error, to be able to have an idea, to have a sense of this spontaneously unfolding contingent. The universe does not unfold necessarily, but in a contingent fashion. And yes, you're absolutely right. His form of rationality is thus, in this respect, fascinating. I mean, he's often reduced to this arch rationalist, Mr. Calculator, Mr. But actually, there are two strands in this story. And as I recently wrote in a piece on Leibniz and AI, he believes in an automatic autonomy or autonomous automaticity. This brings us back to the theme of the paradox. It's automatic, but it is autonomous, and it is autonomous, but it is automatic at the same time. And these paradoxes, not aporias, but paradoxes that make up his thinking, are a big aspect of what has appealed to me in his thought, and what I think is really so interesting in the way he thinks.
True. Well, it's an abstract question, I guess, because you wrote about it on AI. I'm very intrigued. A genuine, let's say, a robust intelligence needs paradox. It needs a friction, an issue.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I think. At constant tension, you want to be able to, to be within and without, this constant movement, this constant to and fro, this constant, for example, to and fro between abstract and ideal and real, between singular and universal, in and out, have this distance. And Leibniz practices that a lot. For example, the way he sees organisms, which he also believes is, what underpins the universe. It's between vitalism and mechanism. It's in conformity with mechanism, but it's a dynamic mechanism. Do you see? So he likes to. So it's a lot of that, and in a way, which actually is very much in keeping, which actually respects and is in keeping with a lot of current scientific discoveries in a way. Yeah. So life as perception, fractals, and the nature of the nature of the nature of the infinite. And Leibniz is a very fruitful thinker with which to think about many matters, including AI today, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple of things. One, we've been sort of tiptoeing around, or mentioned it a few times, is the idea of Leibniz that we have as the calculating genius, which has led to some ahistoricism regarding him as sort of almost like a philosophical demigod that just got everything right. What do you think? So there's two questions. What do you think has led to that? And secondly, do you see your book as sort of the biographical paradox that is is ruffling the feathers of that view?
Well, ahistoricism, I think, because people for some reason shy away from Leibniz, and really they shouldn't. And I'm not sure. Well, I don't know if it's a paradox. Hopefully, my work isn't too much of a paradox, but hopefully it helps. It helps complete the. It helps. Yes, it helps challenge a bit the understanding we have, the normal understanding we have of the traditional understanding we have of Leibniz, and recomplexify things, and kind of shatter those self-evidences we have of him. And I think it's a good stance to have in general.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think he's overlooked? I mean, this is always difficult to ask a scholar of the thinker because you're enamored within Leibniz, I imagine, all day. So it's tough to see. But do you think he's overlooked, or do you think he's even underappreciated today?
Well, having taken distance from Leibniz, since I don't work on him at all these days, and I've moved on to other thinkers, in fact. But the fact that, I keep him around, yes, I think he's absolutely worth coming back to. And I'm saying this not only to sell my book, but he is. I think I think the way he thinks is salvatory today in our current context. And the way he thinks, and the way this kind of often paradoxical stance, and always being on this kind of tightrope, like those people in circuses. And it's good when you're thinking about things to always be a bit unsettled and challenged and have some distance. And he's very good for that. And he's always also very anti-dogmatic in his way of thinking and accepting of other points of view. And in a way against and this is something I deal a bit with in the book. I mean, he's very irked at his time by what he sees as a wave of dogmatism that has gripped the Republic of Letters, and how Cartesianism has taken over, and how effectively they're kind of enacting what we would call today a form of cancel culture. And he's very opposed to that. He says we must not do tabula rasa. We must not enact a clean slate on how we think. We can draw from the past and the present, and towards the future.
This is one of the. I'm glad you brought it in, because I didn't have a means to bring it in. That wasn't clumsily. The other, a large aspect of your book is this Republic of Letters. So, and Leibniz is a little bit maybe even precious about it. But what is the Republic of Letters, and why is he so? Yeah, I'm gonna go with the word precious. He's very defensive. I don't know. He holds it with great esteem, it seems.
Well, sometimes you have to be very defensive over those things that matter and that are taken for granted, and yet which are silently and insidiously undermined. So I'm being defensive of him now. I feel like in an Escher loop soon. And no, absolutely. He feels that the Republic of Letters has been under attack. He feels that the state of knowledge has been under attack. And in a way, it's a form of, rebuke of what we would refer to today as a form of presentism, in a way that we only value, those ephemeral products of knowledge that are produced. And so, whereas he was an active member of the Republic of Letters, which is traditionally construed as, community of intellectual community that values and that is based on the free circulation of ideas and knowledge. He is concerned about certain trends that gripped it, and what he sees as the descent of the Republic of Letters in strife and acrimony, attacks, dogmatism, rejection of anything that is past knowledge. And so he comes up with these some visions of the Republic of Letters, and he conjures up this vision of a colony, for example, a colony that was a terra incognita, but which has now degenerated and has undergone a decline because of all the poor, cheap produce that is being produced there in search of glory, but cheap glory, the facile form of glory. Because for Leibniz, the real Republic of Letters and the ideal Republic of Letters should be that which endures time, endures the judgment of history, the passing of time, and that form of knowledge, that strong form of knowledge, and from past to present, which endures the passage of time, and which is, the true mark, the mark of true glory, and which should be promoted by various rulers, and notably Louis XIV, he hopes.
Once again, this idealism, and he seems very virtuous, almost pious in his relationship to, especially to intelligence, science, academia, or maybe not academia, but but the way you talk about it, it almost feels as if, to use a saying you've used twice, that this is going to bite him in the ass. Is it at this point in his life where we see clearest that which eventually is going to bite him in the ass?
Well, I think you're right in a way, because and I'm not such an expert in his later life, but he is a bit idealistic in his beliefs and even in his relationships, and if you read his letters to Princess Sophie or Princess Sophie Charlotte, once she's decamped with her family from Hanover to London, you see the sadness, you see the growing sadness at being abandoned, and he cannot realize that he's been abandoned, and he cannot realize, reality is catching up to him, and reality is catching up and clashing a bit with this ideal of friendship and this ideal of the visions and the beautiful visions he had. So yes, in a way it is in a way it is perhaps, I don't want to say his Achilles heel, because shouldn't we all strive in a way to be, to have some ideas in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
What do you want people to say from your book regarding Leibniz? That he's human?
That you can be human and an awesome individual and an extraordinary individual at the same time. That you can be human and an operator, but be beholder, but to cleave on, have this piousness, as you mentioned, to a certain set of ideals and visions. That is without becoming a fundamentalist or a fanatic, because he wasn't. He's not that kind of ideal. We're not talking about that. But, in a world of uncertainty, of brutality, that there are sometimes loftier things that one can hope to aspire to and strive to. as Oscar Wilde would say, some of us, we're all in the gutters, but some of us are looking to the stars.
Has your book ruffled any feathers in Leibniz scholarship?
Well, I don't know.
Remains to be seen.
It's early days yet. I'm very pleased and honored that, I mean, the feedback has been good overall, and which is funny because I'm not really a historian actually, and but I undertook this task of writing of completing a more historical task this time round, and I've been quite honored, and I hope I honor Leibniz's memory and help make him better known.
As you said earlier, that you people often come up to you and say that Leibniz is so difficult and they're reluctant to approach him. Where do you think people should begin with Leibniz?
Ooh, well, I would start with some of his. There is, I think it's edited by Lloyd Strickland. It's some of his letters, but his more philosophical letters, where he sets out his view of the world, but in a very pedagogical manner. And people, I think, will not avoid being charmed and enchanted. And I'm not saying this in a naive way, but enchanted by how he understood the world, and not necessarily, wasn't completely made up. Turns out that there's actually quite a bit of scientific basis for his understanding of things. So I would start with that.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add about your book that you feel is key that we haven't touched upon?
No, I don't know. I think it's been pretty exhaustive, but it's good that most things are not exhaustive, and as it should be, because the moment we close something and we predetermine something and we close something, then maybe that then is the time when we lose a sense of life and vitality. So
there you go. Well, I'll be sure to put the links for your book in the description below, and also thank you to Princeton for sending me a review copy. Yeah, Audrey Borowski, it's been a great conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.